Thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. So Ruth, if you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself and what you do now in terms of campaigning and activism for Holocaust Education and Memorial Day, that would be fab. And then we can get into the questions.
Good. Well, I came to England at age 4 on the Kinder transport, which was a rescue operation to Britain of about 10,000 children. And I didn't see my parents for 10 years, during which, with my brother 3 years older, we went through 3 foster families, a hostel and a boarding school.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of dislocations in my early life.
What was your first location when you came to Britain?
Berlin. Oh, I was born in Berlin
Mm-hmm.
into Hitler's Reich. 1935, he'd already changed everything. Um, our first location in England was with a vicar and his wife in Kent, because our parents wanted us to be brought up Christian to protect us against anti-Semitism. And that worked. But unfortunately, it was a disaster because the kindly old vicar had no idea what his wife was up to. I think he foisted 2 refugee children on her against her will. She might have liked 2 dear little children she could dress up and show off, but refugee children are not like that. They're desperately homesick. They don't know what the hell's going on. They're difficult. And she was pretty brutal. I could never understand what was going on. I never got it right. And she would belt me with a leather strap. Um, we were very unhappy in that first um, foster placement until the Quakers who sponsored us realized we were unhappy and sent us to a wonderful Quaker boarding school. We were there a couple of years. Um, when the vicar died, the vicarage had to be vacated. We couldn't go back for holidays. We didn't want to. We were put in a hostel in Richmond, on the outskirts of London, a hostel for bombed out children that had no home because of the London Blitz. It was very unhygienic, chaotic, under supervised, but people were friendly. I have happy memories from that. And then they found another foster family that had 5 children of their own, a wonderful family who treated us exactly the same as their own children. So we were happy there. But the original damage had been done by that first foster family. We only stayed there a year because my brother couldn't cope with the doodlebugs coming over. He had to be moved, and I had to go with him to a third placement, another lovely family with 4 children and a farm, which I was really happy there. In fact, I really, really wanted to be part of that family, um, and planned to be a farmer because I loved the animals so much. But when I was 14, 4 years after the end of the war, my parents had got together again in Germany, and they insisted that I came to Germany. Whereas they allowed my brother to remain in England because he had a scholarship to Cambridge.
Wow.
And
Nice.
and you can imagine how bitter I was that he had a choice and I didn't. It messed me up no end. I was back in England. My parents saw it was a mistake. I just couldn't cope with Germany. I was terrified of it. They let me go back on the promise that I would stay at school and go out for holidays to visit them, which I duly did. But it took a year to get back to England, and that year was the worst in my life. I
So,
came back.
no,
Yeah,
carry on.
have you had enough?
No, I
You've
was
got
going
a
to say,
background to me.
no, so I was going to say, so for that year, were you back in Berlin? Was that where you
No,
went back
my
to?
parents, my parents settled in Mainz, halfway down
Okay.
the Rhine. He did go back to Berlin, I found out much later on, but he was made so unwelcome. And Berlin was so badly damaged. You don't change radicalized Nazi people overnight. They were brainwashed.
Yeah.
And they really believed that the Jews had caused it all.
I mean, hearing it from, you know, I guess essentially the horse's mouth, as it were, you know, what time was like back then, it's a different.
That's a real compliment. I adored horses.
Well, just hearing it, you know, firsthand is very different to reading it in, you know, a textbook or whatever,
sure.
isn't it?
I've written quite a few books. I wrote this one especially for schools. Sorry, I'm trying to get it there because I could never have enough time to answer all their questions. So they would have a copy of this in their library. And later on, I wrote the family history as a play because a German novelist researched the 20,000 Jews who found refuge in Shanghai and came upon my father and decided to research him and wrote a novel about his life, our family. And my book was published in German translation at the same time as a film of the novel, because it won a prize and was so popular, came out, or was broadcast. And I was invited to huge audiences who didn't want to talk about my book. They only wanted to talk about the film. And I couldn't answer what was fact and what was fiction. I had to go and find out. And my son, who was interested in amateur drama, suggested a play, a stage play. And so I said, okay, I'll write it, you produce it. And he did with his amateur drama group. 2 years ago, and this is the script book that I produced for his production.
God, you must be so proud of, you know, kind of seeing your story or your family's story kind of, you know, transcend through different generations and kind of keeping, you know, that spirit alive.
You've put your finger on it. I am so proud of those two books because they are honoring my parents, which I never could do whilst they were alive. Being forced to go to Germany at 14, when I was terrified of anything to do with Germany, I was brainwashed with British propaganda against Germany, turned me against my parents. And I never managed to face the past and come to terms with it in their lifetime, which I bitterly regret now, but particularly the play honors them.
So would you say, I mean, from leaving Germany at, did you say the age of 4?
Yes.
At the age of 4. So I guess your view of your home essentially was shaped by our influence. It wasn't, you know, kind of purely based on what you remember. And I mean, that's quite.
It's amazing what memories you can get in touch with if you really try. And I had 8 years of psychoanalysis, so I was able to get in touch with snatches of memory of those 4 years in Berlin and make sense out of the whole my whole youth up until I was 54, and one of the kinder transport organized a 50th anniversary of our coming over, up to which I had no idea that anybody came from the continent other than my brother and I. It hit me, that conference. It was an epiphany. I suddenly realized how much I'd been denying and avoiding anything to do with the past.
Mm.
And I felt strong enough, with a stable marriage and 3 teenagers and a career in teaching, I felt strong enough to face the past. And when I did, and the Kindertransport hit the news again, it hit the news when we came over. 10,000 children rescued from certain death. Brilliant Britain for doing it. End of story. But actually, it was the beginning of the story for those 10,000 children, though we didn't know it at the time. And of course, everybody's attitude was that we were the lucky ones to whom nothing happened.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I remember last year for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Holocaust, the BBC Two brought out a like a TV film. It was a 2-part TV film called The Windermere Children, and
Yes,
it was,
yes.
I thought it was great. It was amazing. I kind of knew the story before, but kind of seeing it reenacted, I obviously know it. You know, it's based on reality, but it was in fiction. Seeing how some of the locals of Windermere treated, you know, Polish survivors or Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, and you know, whatever atrocities they faced, it was really disheartening to see that you know happened in a place where you kind of thought, oh, you know what, we thought we did something good, but actually our attitude towards all of these refugees, you know, were not the kindest at all. So that was quite
Well,
disheartening.
yes, and we're doing the same today to today's refugees. When I talk with children in school, I always focus quite a lot on what today's refugees are experiencing, and that a little kindness, just a smile, particularly for those who don't know the language and don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so focusing on education, you obviously said you were a teacher. What do you think at this point in time, obviously with all of the things that are going on at the moment, what do you think is most important for the younger generation? So, I mean, I'd like to think that I'm somewhat still young, but you know, people younger than me, what is it that people really need to understand about Holocaust education, how important it is? Because I know it's important, but how
It's
can you
it's
describe it
huge.
to people?
It's hugely important, and we must go on educating children about the Holocaust and commemorating. But we've left it so late. It was 55 years after the end of World War II, before about 30 nations got together and decided on an annual Remembrance Day. Um, Holocaust education had barely started a little before that. We'd left it so late, and every genocide that is not stopped and the perpetrators brought to justice creates huge impunity for more. And that is what I always emphasize. A lot of people disagree with me, and I will have respectful arguments with them. But we really can't teach the Holocaust without the context.
Of course.
And
So
it started off, we were briefed to not talk about anything other than our own testimony. Don't get sidetracked. I couldn't, I was dead against that. I always put the Holocaust in the context of, we didn't bring the previous massive genocide in World War I to justice. That allowed the Holocaust to happen.
Mhm.
Personally think it wouldn't have happened if the Ottoman genocide had been brought to justice, which it wasn't, and it was denied, um, fiercely denied by modern Turkey, and still is. And because we were so late facing the Holocaust, 55 years later, in the meantime, that had built up impunity for more genocides. How many genocides have we had since? We beat our breasts and chanted never again. It's been again and again, and it is still running. And that is why I'm now in my retirement fully an activist,
Of course.
trying to get. Hmm?
Of course. I mean,
Yeah,
you're using your experience for change and change in
yeah,
a positive way. So why wouldn't you want to do it?
exactly, exactly. I'm trying to get people to think a lot more about the path of genocide through the last century, the 20th century. It's a horror story, and it's still going on in the 21st century. And I challenge people, how civilized is the human race to go on allowing genocide? Uh, we need to stop genocide, and in my opinion, we need to stop war as well.
Of course, and I mean it's really good that you've brought up, the current situation of what's going on, with allowing genocide and killing still to happen. Something that kind of came to my attention and infuriated me. I don't know if you know it as well, but do you remember a couple of weeks ago when the Capitol Hill riots happened in Washington?
I don't think anybody will ever forget that.
But I know. I mean, I couldn't believe it happened. To be honest, I was just sitting here like, what's going on? The world's gone mad. But something that
I wasn't actually surprised. I was
no,
horrified, but not surprised.
I agree
I
with
mean,
you
it
completely.
was the logical conclusion of Trump's presidency.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. Part of me was just there like, yes, this has happened. We saw this coming. We cannot deny it. That all of this compliance of Trump's legacy for the past 4 years has just been, he's not held anyone to account for their actions, and he can't even hold himself to account. But that's a whole other issue. But what
Yeah.
I was going to say was, so there were a few people caught wearing or brandishing T-shirts that said "Camp Auschwitz,
Yes.
work brings freedom," and as someone who has learned as much as I possibly can about the Holocaust. I mean, I have a weird kinship with it, and I have distant relatives that unfortunately were killed at Auschwitz. I found out in the past couple of
I
years.
thought that would be in the background of
Yeah.
your interest.
Well, actually, I
Yes.
found this out after my interest was sort of peaked. But what I kind of want to hear from you is, how can people or how can we sort of change people's perception of what the Holocaust is? Because I think wearing a t-shirt such as this, the Camp Auschwitz one, or there was another one saying 6 million wasn't enough. And
Yes,
it's these
that's a particular T-shirt that's
hmm,
really nasty. Well, anti-Semitism is the lie that refuses to die. And it isn't going to die until there is a Pope brave enough to say, we got it wrong.
hmm. So do
And
you think Pope Francis potentially could be that person? Or do you think we've still got to
I,
wait?
I doubt it, because I think the history of the Vatican is that the interest of the Vatican, the life of the Vatican, takes priority over everything.
I went to a Catholic school, so I know exactly what you mean. Don't worry.
So I think I can't see it happening,
Mm,
but I think I like to think that there's enough strength in the human race to overcome this lack of civilization. We have very primitive beginnings when we came down out of the trees. We were a vicious tribal species, and we haven't really left that behind because we've developed so fast and furiously in materialism. We've physically and cognitively advanced with technology, and we've left our emotional development and our ethical development way behind.
Do you
It's
think
primitive.
Do you think that social media, I mean, I know, so Kirsty's written an article for us for Holocaust Memorial Day, and her and amongst a few others. Yes, they will be coming out Tuesday and Wednesday, so be prepared. They will be shared all over socials.
I don't do social media.
I'll send you a link.
Can you send it on an email?
I'll send it.
Of course.
Yeah,
But something that the younger generation, I think Kirsty can definitely, say her piece about this, that they want to use social media for good and changing perceptions and, going on the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day, be the light within the darkness. And I mean, Kirsty, if you want to, carry on and why you think this is important, that the younger generation harness social media to be this change, whether that's, changing education, changing societal perspectives, and, fighting back against racism. I mean, being actively anti-racist in all sorts of forms.
I think young people often don't give themselves enough credit for the power that they do have and they can have without making even a huge amount of effort. I think I always define it as you've got a power in your pocket or your laptop or your handbag that generations ago would have killed to have that kind of exposure. And I was always brought up in an attitude of technological advances and societal advances are something that we should never shy away from. And even my grandparents are very, thankfully, not too avid social media users, because I don't think I could handle that, but they are very tech savvy and they know how to use technology, and I'm very grateful for that, especially in lockdown. And I was always brought up with the attitude of adapt your learning and your activism and your beliefs to the tools that you have access to. And I think that's something that young people sometimes don't realize has such a power. And whilst we were campaigning to make some amendments to the trade bill in Parliament last week, to be able to recognise genocide in the UK, for specifically what's going on in China, we published a video by Ruth and a video by Dorrit Oliver Wolf. And Dorrit's video, in the space of a couple of days, has had about 50,000 views, which is such an incredible amount of that for a platform like YetAgain that was established a couple of months ago. That's a massive amount of people we've been able to reach. And I think it's only ever shown more strongly during COVID is we only have the avenue that is online activism just now. Your protests in person are very limited. I can't go and stand in front of a school assembly. Like in any other Holocaust Memorial Day, I think I spend more time on trains than I do at my desk, jumping between different sides of Scotland. And I love the fact that young people are now really seeing exactly how much they can do with social media, a tool that they, grew up with. And, you've got a generation coming in now who grew up with iPhones and Twitter, and that is so, I mean, it's a bit scary,
I remember a time before that, a very brief time, but it's okay.
But, it's embedded in like the younger generation, it's embedded in their knowledge and how they exist. So we are watching people harness it for good, and it's incredible seeing how well people can do. And young people, be the light in the darkness. I think we have a real scope to be that, because we have this ability to use technology to our advantage. I also remember speaking to, so obviously COVID sort of hit in March, and then we had Yom HaShoah in April or May, I can't remember now. And I remember phoning up one of the survivors I work with in Glasgow and saying, how are you doing? Because usually he would be doing events in synagogues and youth groups. And I was saying, how are you getting on? What's happening? And he said, do you know what? I'm enthused at the fact that I know that when I'm no longer here, I don't physically have to be in a room to make sure education can still take place, because I'm seeing the power that technology has right now to make that happen long term. Which was it was lovely for me to hear, to know that it's a comfort, Ruth. I don't know if you're thinking the same thing as Henry was thinking.
Yes,
but
yes.
it's nice to know that we have a power that has longevity, and we can adapt to whatever we need. And the slight benefit to COVID is we now have so much more recorded footage of people talking. It's, you know, it's not just filming a survivor giving their testimony, it's filming them with a class, or on this call where there's interaction, and young people think very similarly and will ask very similar questions. So you can watch a school assembly with a survivor, and you can have one survivor's testimony streamed to 50 schools at once. Whereas, Ruth, I don't know how you would feel about me making you speak 50 places in one day, but at least this gives survivors the scope to be cross country.
I've already realized that I am reaching more people with my testimony than I did before COVID.
Yeah.
I really should learn social media, but I have so little energy left.
I don't think, you know what, I think if you join social media, it would open up a can of worms. So I think,
well, yeah, I have a very sick husband to look after, which takes up most of my energy, and shielding against pandemic and running a household, it takes up so much energy. What little energy I've got left over, what I do best is to enthuse other people, to have ideas and to forge ahead with their ideas that I just haven't the energy anymore to do myself. I'd love to if I were younger, but I do see the hope in the younger generations.
And I think one thing that really struck me, and this is, sorry to put a slight dampener on all of the amazing things you've just said about the younger generation, but one thing that really struck me was last year a survey came out from America, which said that 2/3 of young Americans basically have no knowledge of the Holocaust or what it is. And I personally found that incredibly disturbing. And part of me just thinks, you know, what are they teaching over there? Because the Second World War in general was quite a big event for most people, including the States.
Not for the Americans as
well,
much.
I, to be fair, I think that too, but I have to, you know,
yes.
say, oh yeah, they did stuff. I don't think they did stuff, but it's fine. No, carry on.
It is disturbing, but much more disturbing, I find, is that our education system is archaic. It is so focused on training, not educating, training kids to pass exams so that they will be nice, docile voters and good workers. We need, for today's world and today's problems, we need the focus to change to developing skills. Skills to, in relationships, critical thinking skills, skills to find the knowledge they need when they need it, a completely different sort of education. And I think democracy is in great danger. It's being attacked from without and within, and we need to preserve democracy by living democracy from the word go. School education should be designed on lines where they live democracy.
So with Holocaust education in school today, I mean, I'm not too sure about Kirsty's experience of this, but my education, we very much focused on, I mean, yes, we covered the Holocaust. I personally just had more of an interest in it, so obviously did some, you know, wider reading. But what do you think can be done to sort of improve, you know, the younger generation's education towards the Holocaust, and, you know, getting them to understand, you know, the atrocities of it? Because when I was at school, people would talk about it, and there would be some people in my class that would kind of be very openly, you know, kind of object to learning to it because they just didn't want, you know, the upset. And then when I got
Holocaust fatigue.
is that what it's called?
Yeah, Holocaust fatigue sets in
Mm.
when you have a teacher who hasn't been initiated into it themselves. And I think there's a big problem because the world that teachers grew up in was a very different world to the world that the learners are growing up in.
Mm.
There's a ever widening gap between the teachers, parents included, and the next generation, because we are developing so fast.
It's so true. But I mean, personally, again, don't know about you, Kirsty, but personally, my two teachers, they were two female teachers. One of them was the same age as my parents. So she was at the time probably early 50s. And the other one was in her late 20s. And both of them were absolutely incredible with learning about Holocaust education. There were just some people in my class that were a bit like, nope. But my teachers were kind of the driving force that got me into it. And the younger one of the two actually lived in Poland for a while, so was kind of a little bit more aware of the Polish side of, you know, on the narrative of what happened.
Well, you are a manifestation of the importance of the teacher themselves.
So true.
And I think we have to face it that not all teachers can be so so engaged in it themselves, which is needed for a subject that is difficult to hold in the mind.
Mm.
Naturally, a lot of youngsters will unconsciously, the mind tends to protect itself and to reject what is going to be too deeply disturbing. So it's tremendously important how it's put.
Mm. I mean, I understand. Oh, no.
When I arrange to go to a school, I always prepare very carefully beforehand, and I make sure that I have at least half an hour over coffee with the teacher in charge before I begin, so that I can get an idea of the background of the school and what they've been learning, and get the measure of the teacher and the teacher's own views, because I have to be careful not to go beyond what the teacher can cope with afterwards, picking up the pieces, because I can't do that.
But sometimes it's, you know, it's your job as a, well, you know, your role as a survivor to, you know, shed the light on the things that aren't being said, because you can't ignore them. And obviously all of these details are incredibly important to know. And I mean, personally, I would rather, if I was back at school, this is going back a while, and we had a survivor come in and talk about their experiences, I would rather them be open about what happened, because I guess to an extent you can't shield the younger generation, you know, to everything that happened, because then you ignore or, you know, glaze over certain parts of history, and it doesn't give you the full context of what actually happened.
I think if
I
can...
I agree with you absolutely, but for me, the real horror is what's still going on today.
Mm. I mean, Kirsty, what were you going to say about your sort of
Well,
experience?
I was going to say, as the frequent token Scot of the call, and having grown up in an education system where Holocaust education is not on the curriculum. Now, that's not to say it's common practice that it's taught, but it's not structured. So from school to school, everybody does it differently, and there's no consistency, which is a great thing and not a great thing, because what you tend to find is the teachers who care about it are the ones who educate about it. It's not just a teacher who would rather be teaching about the Treaty of Versailles and
Oh
suddenly
gosh.
they're having to talk about something they don't want to talk about. Whereas I tended to find it was religious studies teachers and personal and social education teachers who were really passionate about the real contemporary lessons that come with these things. And I went to an incredible school, I got Barhead High School, that cared so much about making sure that Holocaust education did come into the curriculum. I then took it a little bit further. So I really, when I was about 16, decided, right, we're doing a lot and we're still not doing enough. So for the 2 years that I still had in the school, I brought in survivors and I worked with survivors and I developed lessons and I helped develop projects, and I'm still working with the school now. They've gained a couple of awards for accreditation for very good Holocaust education since I left, and I think a lot of that is down to the work that I hate saying it, might be down to the work that I started. But I've
Right, blow
noticed
your
a
own
real
trumpet. Fine. Go on.
I've noticed a difference of some of the survivors I've worked with in, and again, maybe it's in Glasgow where sectarianism is such an issue, and there, religious prejudice is still very, very, very prevalent. I went to a school where our school was the Barhead High School, anyone's welcome, and then 2 minutes up the road was St Luke's, who got hugely better grades, who got, maybe don't put this in any kind of recording, got definitely preferential treatment to us, but we had far better Holocaust education because it was the teachers who cared and we really engaged, and we had we had 2 kinder transport survivors who came separately, got married in Glasgow, and then spoke together for years, Henry and Ingrid Wuga. Would come into schools all the time, and the point is, it's local history for us because that's where they live, and Glasgow's got a really strong Jewish community. So I always found that when education comes from a place of want rather than a place of force, you're going to get better results. And I think my friends at school and the kids at school that I worked with after I left responded better because we made it relevant for them, and it wasn't something that was so strict in a curriculum where you had to tick all the boxes. There was scope to then say, well, we don't have to watch The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, let's listen to testimony that's very accurate, or let's watch The Boy in the Striped Pajamas as a starting point and then let people actually develop an interest but do it factually. And I think that's the benefit I found was people began to care more when you gave them scope to learn what they felt was relevant. And with that, I found so many of them going on to look at Cambodia and Bosnia and Rwanda and Darfur and other contemporary atrocity, and specifically Bosnia, because you managed to engage them with saying, well, this is the second time in a couple of decades that it happened on European soil. And you notice them engage and see the word Holocaust is embedded in their minds as a historical term, but they don't realize it's within their grandparents' lives, for sure. Yeah. And it's within this part of history where it's so recent that we can't teach the Holocaust in isolation. It has to be, it's a thing in itself, but we have to then remember that because of the fact we didn't learn from that, and because laws didn't catch up in time, we have then had subsequent genocides and atrocities that could have potentially been prevented with better education and knowledge.
And I mean, I think, Ruth, you were saying that actually, it took, the British government so long to, or, national government, international governments took so long to have even a commemoration. You were saying earlier that you're really sort of kind of caught up in the what's happening at the moment. So did you want to sort of explain a little bit about kind of your past experience and how that's driving you with what's going on today?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm absolutely horrified that families today are going through exactly what my family went through and worse. And we are no nearer to stopping genocide in the 75 years since the end of World War I. And I think that is absolutely appalling. And we need to look beyond Holocaust education as such to what is preventing this. And it's largely political.
Of course.
That's why I think it is so important to take away the right to decide when it's genocide away from the politicians to somewhere much more independent. I'm not sure whether the British High Court judges are better. They certainly have less self-interest in not calling genocide than the politicians. I mean, this amendment being rejected how many times? At least twice.
Yeah, we're going into another round
Yes,
of
yes.
campaigning in about a week.
But the very fact that it's been rejected by the politicians makes them unworthy of holding the right to name genocide. I mean, I think it's just like getting together a jury of burglars to sentence a thief.
I understand. I mean, one thing actually kind of leading on from that and things that I've, learned over the years is that in Germany, Poland and France, Holocaust denial is illegal in all sorts of forms, but Britain doesn't have that. And I think that's absolutely shocking. Do you think that, that also needs to change to sort of, kind of further, the platform for calling genocide in modern terms?
I doubt it. I doubt that a law making it illegal is going to really do something, because it pushes it underground and makes it more exciting for the nasty people. I think changing people's attitudes through education and through getting people talking more together.
It's all about starting up a conversation, really, isn't it? Because
yeah.
I think especially over the past year since, the pandemic's begun, and I mean, again, don't know what both of your positions on this are, but we're so used to seeing Black people killed in America by police officers, and obviously last year there were Black Lives Matter protests, and personally I didn't see anything wrong with that going on in a pandemic. Okay, if they're social distancing and they're not causing the spread of the virus, that's fine, but we've been seeing people kind of outwardly denying that racial prejudice is an issue, and I find it strange that people can't see beyond the name of Black Lives Matter and all of these things going on. And I think it just proves that we haven't, we're still not learning from past mistakes. And I think it's absolutely bewildering. I don't know what your sort of perspectives were on the whole sort of calamity that was 2020, to be honest.
Well, Ed, we've had a lot of nasty ideas and rising up in 2020 in populism and cancel culture and cancel anyone who doesn't agree with you. I think that is really pernicious, because what we really need is to value different opinions. If somebody has a really outrageous opinion that I can't possibly agree with, I'm interested to know where they got it from and what they base it on. And I would really like to have a discussion with them, and I will approach them respectfully, saying, that's an interesting idea. I want to know more about it, what you mean, what your evidence is. But very few people who want everybody to have the same opinion are willing to talk about it, because their opinion is really based on feeling insecure if there are other people who have a different opinion. They are verging on fundamentalism, and a fundamentalist is a person who has no room for doubt, who is terrified of doubt, who has to have everybody with the same opinion as themselves, otherwise they have to doubt.
Mm.
I
And
think that is a root problem that we need to tackle. Why do we get people in taking this position? Why are they so frightened of different opinions? And this is where we need to live democracy from the word go in school,
exactly,
where
and
different opinions are valued and listened to and
yeah,
not shut up.
I think one of the things that kind of came out of last year, especially not to, just towards Holocaust education, but history education as kind of a whole, with people, you know, kind of saying, oh, why are you trying to desecrate all of these amazing leaders such as Winston Churchill? Look at how amazing he is. And I'm just kind of there. I mean, personally, for me, again, don't know about you, Kirsty, and what you learned at school, but I can see completely beyond what this man smoking a cigar saying fight, we'll fight them on the beaches did. And I mean, these conversations aren't meant to make people comfortable, but that doesn't mean that they aren't important and should be ignored. And I think, anyway, we need to, as a nation, need to sort of reevaluate our history education and how we teach it. Because for me, again, credit to my teachers, saw beyond what the textbook said. And, I wasn't under any sort of guise or any sort of illusion that, the empire was a good thing. I know for a fact it's not, because of all of the things that's noted down in history. And we need to, like you said, have these conversations to understand different opinions or different perspectives, to get another conversation rolling about how we can sort of shed a light on, the realities of it. Because obviously history, depending on who it's, what side you're on, it's a different perspective. No side is going to be the same. But that doesn't mean that all of these things that as a nation we have ignored, the role that we played in the slave trade, the the role that we had in the scramble for Africa, what we did in Australia and New Zealand to the Aboriginals. I mean, I spent 9 months in Australia, and their attitude to Aborigine heritage is changing right before our very eyes. They're taking ownership of what they've done. Obviously, it's not wholly accepted, but I think we as a nation need to have a period of reflection, much like what Germany had in the 1980s, with owning their past mistakes and, learning from them and moving on. And I think you're right. I think education, start them young, basically, is the way
Well,
forward.
I agree, absolutely. But let's look at the whole picture. How can we change the attitudes that children pick up? Because a lot more is caught than is taught. Children imbibe a lot more from the role models that they happen to meet in their life than what they're actually taught by teachers and parents. And the big picture is that there has never been as dysfunctional a family as the family of nations that makes up the human race.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's really
that
interesting.
is that is really daunting. Where do you begin to change this dysfunctional family?
Yeah,
which
that's
is
true.
which is having an enormous effect on children everywhere.
So what do you think we can do as, two youth-led organizations, to take action for the future? What can we sort of, I don't want to say hope for, because I don't want to be too optimistic. I want to be realistic about these things, and be practical. Yeah, so what can we do going forward? What can we make sure that we're doing right and doing people such as yourself justice?
Well, I always encourage people to think more and talk more, because I'm convinced that if more and more people talk in small groups and tackle big subjects like we're doing right at this moment, sharing our experience, sharing our ideas, listening to the other, learning from the others, I'm convinced that potential solutions to all our big problems will emerge. I don't have any answers, but I'm sure that the answers will arise if we do a lot more critical thinking and a lot more learning from each other, sharing. I mean, the main um, tone of relationships in the wider sphere of nation and international is to feel threatened. We don't trust each other. And at the very top, among the leaders of the nations, we have got too many untrustworthy people in power.
Yes, yes, we do. I completely agree
And,
with that. I don't know what you think, Kirsty, but I do.
Well,
I don't know how we can get back trust of other human beings, because it's still very primitive stuff. When we first became human, as I like to say, when we came down from the trees, we couldn't trust anybody but our own family tribal group. And we had to be on the alert. We had to protect ourselves. But that's no longer necessary. But we're still behaving like cave people.
I mean, Kirsty, so with the work that YetAgain are doing, again, sort of the same question, as I just asked Ruth, what can we do and what can we learn from your organisation to, hopefully go on the right path?
you know what, I mean, YetAgain, Joe and Jay and I tend to describe YetAgain as born out of necessity. And Jay had worked with Jack at Demographica before we set up YetAgain, funnily enough, on a piece about Churchill. It's very topical. And one of the things that I found was YetAgain was sort of, we always sort of joked that YetAgain and Demographica were very similar, but we were just tackling slightly different issues, but our morals and our values are very similar, which is why this interview has been fantastic, because it's facilitating a discussion that we're both very keen on. I think dialogue between youth organisations and young people in general is a phenomenal tool. And between Demographica, Burst the Bubble, Ruth, who you spoke with this morning, and there's so many other great youth programs, youth groups that are doing incredible work. And like I said earlier, I think young people, especially collectively, have a power that is often given nowhere near enough credit. And even just YetAgain and Demographica working together has expanded both of our reaches incredibly, and it's a privilege for us to work with you guys, and we hope it's the same for you. But it's been lovely to make sure that just everybody is prepared to help. You just need to find the right people who are ready to share the message that you want to talk about, which is where that's where YetAgain came from. It was born out of a necessity for young people to have a platform to talk about atrocity that wasn't academic in the sense that it's jargon and it's barriers. It's, if young people are prepared to do the research and be factual, we want to platform that. And I think that's something that we've always really been passionate about. YetAgain's not that old, it's a couple of months, or 5-ish, 6 months old now. And I think
you've done an awful lot in that time.
The eye bags that I have got in the last few months, I swear I'm holding my face up with sellotape, but 9 times out of 10. I've actually got a question for Ruth, just if we have a second, just to throw it in. It's something I haven't thought about. You talked about young people learn a lot from the role models that they are presented with. And I think I'm in a very beneficial position where I live. So I live in East Renfrewshire, which has got the largest Jewish community in Scotland. So talking about the Holocaust and talking about anti-Semitism is not taboo. It's pretty common. I work for the Jewish community here. It's a conversation that we have, not happily, but we're open to having it, and there's no real dialogue to stop it happening. So the role models I was presented with in this kind of field of study from a very young age were descendants of survivors or survivors themselves, which I've always found to be a huge benefit. And from that, I then met survivors from out with Glasgow and then into the UK. I very early on memories of working with Eva Clark and Janine Weber, who are two of my favourite people to work with. But my question was, Ruth, do you find that there is a sort of survivor community that acts as a body to make sure young people have space to learn firsthand? Has that been a comfort to you, being able to almost be part of this group of people who all have one shared sort of common goal of education through experience?
Oh, it's been enormous influence on each other. I mean, this is what happens when you get people roughly similar thinking together. If they're too similar, it becomes stale. You don't get anywhere forward. You need to have a good deal of difference to get discussion going. But people who respect each other because they have a similar background, it makes it safe to talk. It makes it safe to differ. It makes it interesting to differ. And it's had a profound effect on me that there are a large group of us that are devoting the energy they've got left in the last decade or so of their lives to doing this. It's tremendously important to all of us. And that we have a lot of interchange together. And I think the effect is largely caught, not taught. And when we plan education, I don't think we think enough about what children are catching unconsciously from simply being with certain people.
I mean,
Yeah.
Kirsty, I don't know if did you have another question?
No.
No.
I had a follow on from that, but I'm happy
Yeah,
to
no,
stay
go.
quiet
Yeah,
and let you go back.
no. Go ahead.
It's just more the phrase the effect is caught, not taught, is something I think I'm going to be adopting into every piece of work I ever do. And I think again, I realize I think I'm unpacking a lot of stuff mentally tonight. I don't know where this is coming from. But the survivors I've worked most closely with are, like I said, two kinder who came from Germany. Separately, met in a Jewish refugee club in Glasgow, got married, were married for 75 years, incredible, one with an MBE, one with a BEM. And they were always just Henry and Ingrid, and that was how we were taught. And we knew that they are, through everything they faced, they found each other and they worked together and they had this incredible impact together. And it was very much a joint effort. And we lost Ingrid towards the end of last year. And I've never considered Henry and Ingrid to be a separate entity. They were very much the same thing. Obviously very different people, but they were one unit. And I suddenly, because the education in Glasgow was very local, because they've been in Glasgow since the 40s, the ripple effect I found from how powerful one bit of testimony that was shared throughout a city, and then throughout Glasgow into Edinburgh, and then throughout Edinburgh up north, and then suddenly we're hitting the borders. And I like to think I am very vocal that we need survivors to sort of kickstart this education, but I think the work and the sort of, even in sometimes emotional trauma that can go into it, is something that it's a sacrifice that is not made in vain. And I think that's the one thing I think young people should have to take away, is it is an emotional trauma. I'm working with the great grandchildren of survivors who are just now unpacking this historic trauma in their family, let alone for the survivors themselves, who are, speaking to Janine Weber, who spent a year of her life underground, literally lying down underground for pretty much a year straight. That must be so difficult to unpack and discuss day after day to kids who are, some of them are not going to take it away and listen to it properly. I think that's, going back to our earlier point, I think that's what young people need to take away, is it in some cases is a genuine trauma to get this information, and we have a duty to deal with it respectfully.
And I mean, I think sorry, no, go on, Ruth.
Yeah, I think that's tremendously important. And a part of Holocaust education that is really important is preparing the group before a survivor comes and then debriefing afterwards, sharing different experiences of the session with the survivor speaker. And when we are all no longer able to talk with groups, it can still go on because our children and grandchildren, enough of them are interested to continue, but the most powerful effect is if they continue to represent the Holocaust together in a panel with more recent first generation survivors. And there are many first generation survivors of other genocides ready to speak. And the most powerful I find in my work is when I have the privilege, which YetAgain has organized, to speak together with a more recent survivor and a current survivor.
I mean, I think you
next week YetAgain has organized this. I have the privilege of being on a panel together with Ahmed, is it, from Bosnia, and Rahima, who I know quite well.
Oh, Rosie's event.
Yes.
Rosie's event. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I mean, that is so powerful, and I try to encourage more interested people like the three groups we've been talking with this week to think in those terms of panels.
So I think you guys have, I mean, perfectly kind of rounded off, you know, the kind of main body of this interview. What I would just like to say from both of you, if you could summarize very briefly what Holocaust Memorial Day means to you as individuals, that would be fab. And then that would be the perfect thing to sort of put as the final note, the closing message, if you will.
Ruth, on you go.
I was going to say that to you.
No, I can go then. That's fine. For me, Holocaust Memorial Day and the concept of commemoration of genocide it's important to me because I've been privileged to hear the testimony from survivors of the Holocaust and subsequent genocides, and they have trusted me and my colleagues and my friends to pass on their story as their witness. And as somebody who doesn't have a personal family connection to any of these genocides beyond some German family who were interned in the UK, it's a real honour and a privilege to have that trust. And for me, Holocaust Memorial Day is a reason and an opportunity to show that their trust is not in vain.
Excellent. For me, I'm a bit more critical. I think commemorating the Holocaust is tremendously important. And the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust excels in organizing a fantastic main event. And of course, there are other tremendous events all around the country. But I'm worried about commemoration without commitment to action, because I think there is a danger that it can be unconsciously used as a sort of cleansing of guilt so that you can feel cleansed for the year until it comes round again without doing anything, whilst continuing to be a passive bystander. That worries me quite a lot about Holocaust Memorial Day. And I try to I've had so many goes at trying to convince Olivia Marks Waldman to include an a deliberate invitation to everybody partaking of the event to make a definite commitment to do something in the coming year that you will do, and you've written in your diary that you're going to do it. That's absent. Why are people so afraid of it?
I mean, I have no idea, but I think having, you know, your perspective on this and being critical is actually quite interesting, because I think that's probably an opinion that's held by a few people, and I think, you know, we should be understanding, you know, the authentic feelings of people who have survived these atrocities. So I think that's a really good thing to do. And I mean, essentially, I think, you know, the main sort of point I took away from that is it's kind of a call to action for change, and that people need to be sort of proactive, not reactive, like this government was with the pandemic.